in their feudal worlds. And then as trade exposed Eastern culture and Greco-Roman history to the West, there was the birth of higher education. That's when the university began, the idea of the academy. And that resulted in an explosion of reason and scientific discovery that we had never known. One of the main motivations, though, also is often forgotten in the history books, is that during that time of the Renaissance was also the time of the Reformation. And when the Bible was put into print, this was a pretty revolutionary deal. And a big part of teaching literacy was motivated by Martin Luther, who thought everybody should read the Bible for themselves. So that piece of literacy came about, and the idea of everyone becoming literate, of having a formal education, became a big part of that. So if you don't like school, kids, blame Martin Luther for it. Okay, there you go. Schools in the U.S. were once a place where children were taught American values, learned reading, writing, and arithmetic. They were given these tools but not taught necessarily how to use them. It was simply assumed that they'd figure that out. So that's where that was. Many things have changed since then, though. And so as we look at American history, we look at, go on to the next slide. We are the first nation in the history of the world to have government-run education for everyone. It's mandatory, right? Kids have to go to school. You get in trouble if the kids don't go to school, right? So, mandatory education. We are the first nation in the history of the world to require mandatory education for everyone. It has been a privilege for the few for quite a long time before that. So it's considered a right in American culture. I have a right to good education, right? No exceptions about it. It's also been viewed as the great equalizer. And what I mean by that is it gives you an equal chance. If you have an education, then you can become more successful in life. So it's viewed as something that equalizes that chance for the poor and the wealthy alike. It just gives supposedly gives everybody an equal chance. Now that's the way it's thought of. Does it really do that or not? I don't know for sure. That's always been a debate. Does it really work to give everyone an equal chance? And of course, with that comes the answer to most of society ills. We think of education as the answer to problems in our culture. People, we got a problem with drinking and driving. Well, we just need to educate people, right? We got a problem with sexual promiscuity. Well, we just need to educate people. We need to have sex education in our schools, right? So we've come to this point where we think education solves all of life's problems, and we just need to do it better, do more of it. So a burden of education has been in our culture as a solution to many of life's problems. You can go on to the next slide. With that belief, there's a rapid growth of services provided by our government when it comes to education in our government-run schools, right? In our public schools. So with the breakdown of the family and the increased involvement of the state in the schools, many of the functions that were once part of family life have been handed over to the school, placing a tremendous burden on the educational system within the United States. Family mealtime has been replaced with school-provided meals. You can go to breakfast. Kids go to breakfast, they get lunch, and they go home, and if mom doesn't really feel like cooking, they're not going to starve to death, so maybe we don't need to do that. So we have a culture that's becoming more and more dependent on the school to fulfill things that used to take place in the family. Things like personal hygiene are taught in school. Health is taught in school. Carol Hunt knows that well. How to take care of yourself, keep yourself healthy. Sex education is taught in school, so parents no need to talk to their kids about that anymore, right? Social services are supplied in school. You got a social services, if you know, got those things taken. School psychologists, kid has a problem with learning or with some other issue, behavior problems. Got to take care of that, so we got school psychologists. School nurses, right? Have to have school nurses in school. Also, they provide a degree of physical and mental health care. Now, early childhood education, we've got preschool. You've got to send your kid to preschool now, right? And after-school programs. We have preschool and after-school programs also for kids who can't, when mom and dad are both working, they need someone to take care of them, right? So now we have a particularly, what used to be many of the things that families did, now the school does. So, also, there has been a removal of religious training from the government-run schools, right? Education's largely become a secular endeavor. You can't, certain things you don't do in schools. Okay? Now, as parents and as families become more lazy about training and raising their children, they've got to realize this. Religious training, what they get on Wednesday nights and Sunday morning, is not enough. I'll just tell you that right now. The church will do its best. That's not enough. If it's not happening in the family, it's not happening to a large degree. So, there you go. Because it's not going to happen at school. It's not going to happen in preschool. It's not going to happen during day school. And it's not going to happen in after-school programs. So, values, however, may be taught. Where those values came from is questionable. Any religious basis for teaching, any religious basis for those values becomes then proselytizing, which is considered illegal within the school system. Now, does that mean you can't talk about your faith in school? Every child can. They have freedom of religion. You cannot deny a child's right to talk about Jesus Christ in his school, according to the law. Can a teacher talk about it? They can under certain conditions. When you're teaching about world religions, you can talk about Christianity. You can tell about what it's about. Okay? If child asks a question, do you believe in God? The teacher can respond, yes, I do. The child asks a question, who was Goliath? You can answer the question. And you can say he was a character in the Bible. He was a giant that hated the people of God. And you can get into the story a little bit. The rule is now, right now, is if you can spend time discussing those questions in your class, as long as it does not impede the educational process. That's not considered part of the educational process, apparently. So as long as it doesn't impede the educational process, you can do it. That's a lot of interpretation right in there. So it's one thing my daughter loves to do is to talk about that. I don't think she's impeded too much educational process in the part of it, and I think, in fact, it helps the educational process. But that's my own opinion. So, all those services, all that going on. I have some questions. There's the next slide has one question on it, but I have a couple of more you can add to that. I added this after I'd made it the PowerPoint. So, a couple of other questions you can add to that is education the great equalizer? Is education the answer to the problems in our society? So, those are the three questions. Have schools become a replacement of traditional American family life? Agree or disagree? Why or why not? Is education the great equalizer? And is education the answer to the problems in our society? Those are the three questions. I'd like you to spend some time, turn around and discuss those with each other, and we'll pull back together here in about 5 minutes. Okay, I can see that this is getting us going here. It's time to move back, though. Let's go on to the next slide here. Okay. I would like to talk a little bit about where, and most people, I'm going to take you into an area that very few people contemplate. Teachers in teacher training, many of them are not taught about this. But there are three major philosophies of education that are battling for the control of the American school system today. They have been, it's been going on for quite a while. But it takes place among those philosophers up there in higher education. And that trickles down, and that really has impacted where we are with public schools, and may answer a lot of questions a lot of people have as to why things are the way they are in our public schools today, and maybe answer a lot of teachers' frustrations as to knowing why things are the way they are in our schools. There are three major philosophies that are involved. The first is what we call really two different ones, but they have been combined and are allies with one another. Essentialism and perennialism. This was birthed in the area of the before the Industrial Revolution. So before we had this Industrial Revolution in the United States, this school of thought has been around for a long time. Okay, this is probably the oldest of the different schools of thought out there, and it predominated the scene prior to the Industrial Revolution, okay? And the concept of essentialism is that in the lower grades, K through 6, the 3 R's are really big, okay? Reading, writing, and arithmetic, if you can spell that right with 3 R's. Okay, but reading, writing, and arithmetic are, that was rebirthed during the Reagan and Bush administration. Emphasis on reading and math. You saw that come through and all the testing that went on. That concept, that idea about education, that's what's supposed to be for sure at the lower levels. You have to have that emphasis on math and reading. Joining hands with that school of thought is another group that we call perennialists. Now, anybody who's involved in horticulture knows what a perennial plant is. That's one that comes up year after year and continues to grow and produce, versus an annual that dies off and then you have to replant it every year, okay? Perennial is something that happens year after year after year. This is a classical, sometimes known as a classical education movement. You have Latin-based schools sometimes as it. You study the great literary works of the past. The focus is on the great truths of society that have stood the test of time. And you find those where? Well, some academic guy decides what is the great truths of all time, right? Study history. Examples on this picture here, you've got pictures of people like Einstein, Socrates, William Shakespeare. Yeah, if you're going to do this, then you've got to study Shakespeare. You've got to study Socrates. You've got to do the Socratic method. You've got to get into these great thinkers of the past, because they are the ones who hold the ideas of Western culture and society, and that's where you go. Now, you'll see that debate on the college campuses, right? You have those people in those professors that stick to this is the important thing. You usually find them in the liberal, what is it called? Arts. Yeah, in the liberal arts. It's a kind of a liberal arts kind of a picture, and who are the people that thrive in the liberal arts education? It's the history, the Bible, the English teachers. That's where their focus is in that division of the school. So they're going to be into this. Let's study these ancient writings. Let's study these. These are going to give us the foundation that we need to tackle life. So you'll see that there. Truth, however, is found in reason. upper levels of math are studied not because of their inherent value and their application, because many of their applications are not found. But it exercises the mind. It trains the mind. The idea is that the mind is like a muscle. You train it, you get better at it. Through lots of anguish and work, we call it academic rigor, you have a greater mind. And supposedly, how you apply that then is kind of a mystery. Okay. Helps people think rationally. School is to be geared around the time-tested truths of the surrounding culture, whatever those are. So it's a very conservative type of education. It continues to hold up traditions of the culture that you live in, the time-tested truths. That's what we call essentialism and perennialism, okay? So that's sometimes known as traditional education. Now, how do you get this into the heads of the kids? Through lots of discipline. Discipline learning. They just got to suck it up and learn, right? You drill it into them, okay? At the lower levels and at the upper levels, you cause them to memorize things. You have to regurgitate important information because this is what you have to know. These are the values you are supposed to maintain. So there you got it. The great thinkers, educators, that's one of the schools of thought, and it continues to battle for the minds of our kids. Okay? Now that was, teachers know this, okay? That's the testing thing you've had to go through under the Bush and Reagan administrations, Bush's and Reagan administrations. Particularly under George Bush Jr., that became a big deal. Okay, next one, next slide. Progressivism. That was birthed in the early 1900s, so it makes you wonder how progressive it really is, right? Okay, the picture on the left, there's a series of 3 pictures. The guy in the middle is the main speaker for this position, and his name is John Dewey. Now, this is not the guy who did the Dewey Decimal System. This is a different fella, okay? Don't confuse the two. He comes out of the Industrial Revolution. This was during that time that was developed, the early 1900s. The concern is that every scholar be a workman and every workman be a scholar. In other words, if you're out there working in the trenches, you should be a scholar, and if you're a scholar, you should also be involved in doing some work, not just sitting in your ivory tower, okay, thinking great thoughts. Should be involved in the work. The base is that the child is educated according to his natural aptitudes. What kind of gifts does the child have? We educate a child according to those gifts. And then how do those gifts then fit in with the needs of society and culture? How do they fit in with industry, for example? So school is then geared around the needs of production of goods and services in society and the individual child's strengths to meet those needs. So you test this child, you find out what their aptitudes are, where their strengths are, and then you educate them in a way that fits those so that they can be a productive member of society using their giftedness and their talents. That's really the idea behind progressive education. And it's also why progressive education expanded rapidly the kinds of things that went on in school. It's why you expanded the curriculum to home economics, vocational education, physical education, college prep for those who had the aptitude for it. The focus was on practical life skills in many ways. You had to learn these practical life skills, and so there's still that emphasis. The movement still focuses on the needs of society, therefore there's a wide range of services are developed in schools to help meet those needs. So if you ever wonder why that's all happened, that's part of it. Schools started swimming programs because there were poor people that were coming to schools that needed a bath, to tell you the truth. Had to do with personal hygiene. We taught students how to behave themselves at the table because that's part of the need of culture and society. And so you had all these home economics, you had vocational ag, voag, you had other vocational types of courses that people were put into. That came about under progressivism. And of course, those who had the aptitude went further. Yes?
One thing about John Dewey, which everybody here ought to know, is that he was a rabid atheist. And as a result, he wrote against Christianity, against the Bible,
Yeah.
as well as all the other stuff that you mentioned.
Yeah, he is a humanist. There's no question about it. He received the Humanist of the Year award at one time in his life too. Yeah. So, yeah, he was, but the thing that was good about him is that he did care about what the needs of each child was. He paid attention to those. Now, the problem with that is this is exactly what you've seen in other countries, right? In socialist countries, we test you in China, for example, right? They're all tested at a certain age. If they don't pass this test, then they're directed that way in their education. If they do, they go that way, you know? So now you're tracking kids according to what supposedly their aptitudes are, and how well those tests measure that, I have no idea. But that's kind of piece of that puzzle. So you'll see that, and that's been this whole thing between the traditional essentialist perennialists and their battle between the progressive education has been going on for years. And education swings back and forth between one of those and the other. And teachers experience this all the time. Oh, we've got new curriculum. Before we were supposed to get all ready for the test. Now we got to do this. Now they're changing over to this because the winds of change keep swinging back and forth. And historically, it's been between these two ideas. Third one, this is the newcomer on the block, Reconstructionism. This was born during the 60s and 70s. That tell you anything about it? Okay. This philosophy of education has rapidly gained momentum during the past 25 years and is now a major player competing with the other two. And you'll note that there's going to be a lot of interesting things that occur yet because of the way this one is taking over like gangbusters over much of education. The focus is on the reconstruction of American society. So you were taught in progressivism, you were taught to help students prepare to meet the needs of society, right? Based on their aptitudes. Before progressivism, it was traditional education, and it was basically to empower and teach people the values and importance of the culture, and very conservative position. No change. Progressivism was about change. Progressive, right? Okay. Now you get into Reconstructionism. And this is the idea that we need to reconstruct society, and the schools is the way we're going to do this. We're going to reconstruct society. Okay? Rapidly gained momentum during the past 25 years. The focus is on the reconstruction of American society. It is really more of a movement than it is a specific philosophy. It looks very different from one place to another based on the driving force behind the movement. What is the driving force? How would you like to see society changed? How would you like to see it reconstructed? Depends on who the driving force is behind that as to how that looks. Now, if the driving force is the Rainbow Coalition, it's going to look very different than if the driving force is to lead the world in technology. Both of those are attempts to try to reconstruct our culture. Okay? But they look very different, right? So reconstruction is like this thing that's really vague. It's out there, but it's always trying to reconstruct. And therefore, teachers are involved in that. Okay, what kind of modes of instruction are there within Reconstructionism? There is a common sense. And I have some pictures up on here On the one on the left, you have people doing a service project to help the betterment of their culture and their society around them. And the school leads them in this service project. They go out and they build something or they help do something that's a benefit to their community. Good thing, right? We like that. I do like that. However, there are also other things that get them involved in, depending on their orientation. You have a little girl or a guy, I think it's a guy. I am pro-life. I'm a pro-life generation. That's Reconstructionism. We want to reconstruct our society to be more pro-life. That's Reconstructionism, if you want to put that in your schools, right? You want to reconstruct. So it can be some good ways, it could be some tough ways. Picture down below, rainbow stuff, Rainbow Coalition. We want to reconstruct our society so that all kinds of patterns of sexual behavior are acceptable, right? And sexual identity is up to you to choose. There's that movement within, like I say, it can look very different in different situations. Methods that are used are, like I said, work projects. You might get out and try to create social awareness of an issue. Another kind of thing that's definitely part of this is the project and problem-based learning. Now here's a guy at a science fair showing off his project. This is the kind of method that Reconstructionists like, because you give student a problem or a project to solve, and then you give them the tools to solve it. The teacher simply stands by the side and guides them, giving them information and stuff they need in order to gain that for their problem. Teachers also tend to influence people and point things out as far as what needs to be reconstructed. So pretty much the teacher has a fair amount of freedom in how they do that, although the textbooks like to suggest certain things. So now teachers are having to siphon through their textbooks, especially if you're a Christian teacher in a school, trying to figure out what is an acceptable thing for my child to learn at this point in life, because some Reconstructionist out there thinks that my kid should be trained that they can choose whatever gender they want, right? So now they've got to deal with that in their school system as well. So you've got those kinds of issues floating around out there. And on one side, it's kind of scary. On another side, it could be used for a tremendous amount of good. That's Reconstructionism. Okay. So those three movements are out there, and they sway curriculum back and forth and swing it from one side to the other, and our poor teachers are in there trying to figure out what to do. They pull their hair out trying to adjust all these changes. So pray for your teachers, because this battle is going on for the public school, for the minds of children. All three schools are at it. You got a war going on among them. It's a war of minds. It's a war of philosophies. It's not necessarily someone out there shooting at somebody else, but it's a war of philosophies. So in your groups, are schools supposed to reflect the values of society? Are schools supposed to teach children to be productive members of building or strengthening the existing society? Or are schools supposed to? There you go. Go at it. Have fun with those questions. Okay, I'm going to move us forward pretty well here. We're running out of some time, so we're about done. Let's go on to the next slide. Let's go to the next one. I put a chart in your packet about those three different philosophies. It kind of tells you, also gives you, I won't say that the Christian school is not immune from this either, and I just want to say that because it's not. I've been in different Christian schools, and quite a few of them, and they basically adopt one of those three methodologies, and it's put under a Christian perspective, and I've written that and highlighted that on yours as to what biblical forms that could take on that chart. And you'll see the emphasis within their Christian, within their Bible programs, particularly. And my question is you're just putting a Christian veneer on something that's quite secular, and actually don't know it, but that's what they're doing. And so I don't want to knock Christian schools. I've been teaching in one all my life, but I've seen that tension and I've seen that struggle go on throughout Christian education as well. So it's not as simple as adding a Bible verse to your curriculum and saying it's Christian now. Okay, there's more to it than that, and I think that's a struggle that some people don't understand, is that also has invaded our Christian schools as well. You'll see something next week that maybe help you with that, but you'll see the difference in what the role of the teacher is and different things like that as you adopt different patterns of thinking which school is the best. Next, yeah, we have a whole list of different kinds of schools that exist in our culture today. Public schools, outdoor schools, church schools, private schools, classical schools, home schools, charter schools, vocational schools, industrial schools, magnet schools, Christian schools. We've got about any kind of school you can think of going on out there right now, some of them adopting one of those particular positions and running with it. So, and so that's, a lot of that's within the public school system, some of it's outside when you get to home schools and church schools and Christian schools. But it's all there. Private schools that are not Christian schools. You have a lot of those too. Many of those are classical schools where they're studying Latin besides regular English curriculum. Well, the questions I have to leave with us today are also a number of things come out of that. As the secular family in our culture continues to fracture for lack of covenant love, children, the product of a union that was intended to produce a permanent and loving space, are found to be traumatized by the instability of their home lives. And these are the people coming into many of our schools. Many of these children dread the weekends. They hate weekends. Why? They would rather be in school. Fewer and fewer people are going into the teaching profession. I want you to know that. It's going to be harder and harder to find teachers, and it continues to be so. The trend has been the numbers of teachers in teacher education programs has dropped dramatically in the last 20 years. And it will continue to drop, I think, as things go on. It's becoming more and more difficult to be a teacher. And it's becoming more and more a thankless job. As of now, there's a teacher shortage at all school levels and subject areas across the United States. Used to be that it was only in certain areas, and it's increased. So we have a teacher shortage issue. Why? Who wants to be a teacher in today's climate? So as parents, I want to encourage you to encourage the teachers. Biggest discouragement teachers have is not the kids. Even they are tougher than nails to work with, some of them. But biggest discouragement is parents who expect teachers to solve all of their child's problems. Their individual child's problems. And to tell you what, they're doing a pretty good job, because those kids would rather be in school than they'd be home, rather than at home on weekends. They really are. So I want you to encourage them. When it comes to education, we are a divided culture. And the question I leave with you, does the Bible address education? Next week, you're going to find my answer. Yes, it does. Okay. All right. We'll see you next week, hopefully back again. We'll delve into what does the Scripture teach us about education. Thank you.